Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Even with 5 years of what has proved to be an exceptional economic recovery, and especially given where we started from in 2008, the provisional nature of how many people still feel about business is very real and palatable. Welcome back, and thank you again for supporting the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and this time a deeper dive into the current state of business in the region. South Carolina lawmakers wrapped up their legislative work, and under the heading of long-term, how will Duke Energy's coal ash cloud rain on their parade? We start in a moment, and later on, Duke, North Carolina State President Paul Newton joins the dialogue.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded June 6, 2014. On this week's program, Dr. Robert Bliss of Wake Forest University, Otis Rawl from the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, and special guest Paul Newton, North Carolina State President, Duke Energy. And now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Almost happy summer, close enough for discussion's sake. Welcome, guys. Welcome back to the program.
Glad to be back.
Odie, wow, South Carolina, I love watching South Carolina politics. It's never lost for drama. Sometimes low drama, sometimes high drama. But we, just wrapped up relatively recently the legislative session in South Carolina. What worked? What didn't? What were you excited about? What are you still concerned about?
Well, I think what worked, let's start there first, is I think our General Assembly and our governor are focusing on the one issue that we believe is the most important issue facing this state is workforce development and making sure we've got a qualified workforce for the types of jobs that are being created in South Carolina. A lot of money and a lot of different programs were put in place, early childhood reading, teaching coaches to kind of fill the pipeline. Plus, they put money in our technical colleges to allow us to focus on STEM-type studies that our advanced manufacturing community wants. And we even focused on higher education, getting some money there to make higher ed affordable. What we didn't do this year is we didn't focus on infrastructure like we thought we would get into. I think that'll be the primary issue next year as we contemplate what's happening at the Port of Charleston, the additional capacity issues that we're going to need on our interstates to get goods and services to our plants and back to the port. We're going to have a substantial infusion of capital into our roads and bridges. So,
and to that point around DOT and the funding and the widening of some of these roads like I-26, is there a real possibility that a higher gas tax is on its way, whether Nikki Haley supports it or not?
Well, I think the general public is way ahead of our public policy makers, I think, on this. They understand from all the surveys that we've seen we need to put money in our roads. I think there's going to be talk around a variety of different mechanisms, some on fee increases, some on gas tax. You can't do it without a gas tax to get the money that you need. So we're looking at somewhere around a dime over 10 years, looking at increasing driver's license fees, looking at registration fees, looking at a multitude of other things. We need about $450 million in infusion on a recurring basis to be able to just address our needs.
Yeah, and I would guess $450 to $500 million is probably just for some of the issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And that doesn't address the mass transportation issues and all, but that's just really focusing on our interstate system and some of our rural bridges that are in pretty poor shape.
Hey, Rob, in the Tar Heel State, what are the policy issues that businesses most focus on right now? What do you get the sense of?
I get the sense that it's regulatory uncertainty is a big thing. We still haven't seen, I think, what has the impact Obamacare is going to have on businesses, because it hasn't kicked in right. For businesses, the mandate's not there. We're going to see some repricing from the insurance companies, and we'll
Most
see
likely going upscale.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't seen the impact of that, even though it's nominally here. It hasn't really hit. We're seeing companies holding back from hiring because of uncertainty there. On the regulatory side, particularly, I'm familiar with bank regulation. There's massive uncertainty and hundreds of regulations coming down the pike, which are impacting not only the big banks like Bank of America, but also community banks. And we're seeing problems in defining what is a qualified mortgage, and there's uncertainty about that. That's making banks kind of pull back because they're risk averse. They don't want to make mortgages that then turn out to be not meeting the regulations. So I think the primary thing is the regulations and the uncertainty that's created by that and the Obamacare.
Yeah, well, let me split something out just from that. You talked about mortgages for just a second. Rates have ticked up just a bit in mortgages, and that's slowed some of the mortgage applications. But what I've heard, both anecdotally but also statistically, that the banks are becoming a little bit more lax, not to say sloppy, but lax in underwriting standards when they approve mortgages. Do you get that sense that they're getting a little easier when it comes to applying for a loan?
There is.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that. We saw the banking industry fight very hard against regulations that would go back to the 80% loan-to-value ratios that we used to have before things got very loose in the early 2000s. So they rolled that back completely. They rolled back any attempt to limit FICO scores. And in what's called leverage finance, to do with mergers and capital restructurings, some of the banks have gotten very loose. So there is that going on, but there's also, I think, a sense of legal risk, which is overhanging the mortgage market.
Yeah, sure. Otis, let's come back to something specific to South Carolina. There's been a lot of turnover in some senior leadership in South Carolina. Glenn McConnell's gone to the College of Charleston. I mean, we tick off on a lot of these things. Nikki Haley is up for re-election. There's been a turnover recently in DSS down there. Cheryl Stanton's fairly new to the job. A lot of senior leaders. How does that affect, and couch all of this in 2014's midterm elections, what kind of risk does this put the Palmetto State in?
I'm not real sure it really puts the state at risk. I like to think that the business community is really not in charge, but we create the jobs, we create the synergy around it. The politics kind of take care of itself. So for the Palmetto State, I think you can still see us progress. I see job creation, wealth creation. Now, you talk about Senator McConnell taking over the College of Charleston, and people always tend to fill the void that's there. You still got leadership with Senator Harvey Peeler, Senator Hugh Leatherman, Senator Nikki Setzler on that side. You still got Bobby Harrell. You still got the leadership on the House. I think Nikki Haley ends back being governor again. You've had some turnover in the agencies and all, but agency heads, in my opinion, we tend to deal with those folks that have been there for a while that know the process. The agency heads can kind of come and go. What we deal with is the status quo that's in the agencies, and that's where the stability is. It's not the stability at the top. It's the stability in the managers that are at agencies that help us get through the permitting process and things of that sort. So politically, we will still be in real good shape in South Carolina. It's going to be, I think the status quo is going to be pretty much the same. Not much is going to change in the House of Representatives. Still 70, 75 House members. The Senate's not up. All our constitutional officers will stay Republican. Our congressional delegation will stay the same. So even though you've had some change in the Senate, overall the change is not going to be meaningful by a large extent.
I hear what you're saying. You also had kind of spoken around a little bit. You talk about business and industry having a head of steam, and it's been great in South Carolina. And one of the agency heads is another Bobby Hitt. Secretary Hitt's been in Commerce now for 4 years and been very important to the state, as you well know. How much risk is it going forward that he says, I've done it for 4 years, I just don't want to do it another term for Governor Haley?
Well, I think the business community's got their fingers crossed that Bobby stays there another 4 years. Bobby didn't make a commitment, has never said really where he was, but I mean, every month Governor Haley and Bobby are making a significant announcement in South Carolina. The pipeline's full. I think that hopefully Bobby will stay at least another 2 years. Then, as you get into the lame duck part of a gubernatorial 4-year period, you can see some of the people leave. But we're hoping that Bobby and some of the people that she's got over her agencies stay, because it's working real well for the business community, and I think it's working well for the state of South Carolina.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. 5 years into this economic recovery, and it's interesting to watch how we feel in general across the Carolinas about it. We'll get a sense of that a little bit more with our next guest. Next week on this program, though, we'll expand on this whole issue. We have 4 of our resident economists. We always enjoy these guys. A very active and lively discussion. It's our mid-year economic and policy review. Joining us from Clemson University, Dr. Scott Baer. Also, Dr. Harry Davis from Appalachian State, as well as Harry is also on the North Carolina North Carolina Bankers Association. I knew that. Frank Hefner from the College of Charleston, and finally Dr. John Sylvia, who is the chief economist at Wells Fargo, will also join us. You could describe Duke Energy's status right now as the best of times and the worst of times. No doubt, and rightly so, the coal ash matter pervades much of the discussion these days. And the utility's less than warm relationship the past couple of years with the North Carolina Utility Commission. But heap on top of that the expanding alternative fuel mandates and the industry, a new proposed gas pipeline venture, as well as dramatic coalescence of the broader Carolinas energy industrial cluster. And you might say in aggregate that the future is pretty exciting, one way or another. Joining us is Duke Energy North Carolina President Paul Newton. Mr. President, welcome to the program.
Chris, thank you for having me. Good to be with you guys.
Paul, when you list some of these issues, and we want to start talking about coal ash, but it's an exciting time. However you come down, right or left, it is going to be not a make or break it time, but I mean, these are some pretty critical issues going on for Duke Energy and the industry in general, right?
Absolutely. Energy is the lifeblood of our economy, so it's very important that we get it right. We enjoy rates in North Carolina, electric rates, that are some 20% below the national average, and that's a competitive advantage for us, and we need to continue to get that right for the good of North Carolina.
Do you feel like Duke Energy got the coal ash issue right?
No, we didn't get it right, but we learned a lot, and we're continuing to learn a lot. That pipe that broke at the Dan River was an accident. That is on us. It shouldn't have happened. We've apologized for that. I apologize to our customers and to the state of North Carolina. We're better than that. We have galvanized around that, moved with a keen sense of urgency to stop that leaks, permanently stopped, to clean up the Dan River, and we're in the process of doing that and doing it right. We're staying in touch with the local communities. We're staying in touch not only with the state of North Carolina, but the state of Virginia. So we're going to keep that dialogue open, and at the end of the day, we want our customers to be proud of what we do in recovering from that incident.
When you look at Dan River or Riverbend or Sutton or any of the priority coal ash sites, Paul, we're talking a little bit about symptoms. We're trying to fix something that broke, or the coal ash that leaches into a river or groundwater. But when you go back upstream to the DNA of this whole idea, we're still talking about generating electricity from fossil fuels, from coal. That has always kind of been the debate, the push and the tug between those who use energy, those that generate energy, and those that are much more sensitive, if you will, to an environmental impact. So is this just another way that we're debating coal as a generation?
Yeah, every source of generation, fossil and renewable, has pluses and minuses, pros and cons, every single one. But the Carolinas have benefited over the years by having a diverse portfolio of generation sources. You're in the banking industry, and you know how important it is to diversify a portfolio for investing. It's no different when it comes to power generation. We enjoy hydro assets, nuclear assets, coal assets, combined cycle assets, and renewable assets, and I should add energy efficiency. Those all come together to give the Carolinas a competitive portfolio of generation assets, none of which is the silver bullet. You can't stand on one of those generation assets and be successful. We really need them all.
Paul, I just asked the question in regard to coal, and I think there's a big push by the environmental community to really get rid of coal plants completely.
Right.
As we close coal plants in South Carolina and North Carolina, how do you see filling that niche and the capacity issues that you're going to lose as far as having enough electricity as the Carolinas and this region grows? So what's Duke's solution to that as these coal plants are going to close?
Right. So coal generally serves as what we call a base load resource. It tends to run all the time. Now that's changed over the last few years, and it's become more of a cycling resource. Today, the way federal environmental regulations are designed, it tends to push all utilities, not just Duke Energy, but all utilities to combined cycles as a replacement for coal generation. We've closed 7 of our 14 plants in North Carolina. We've reduced our carbon emissions since 2005 by 20%. We have been successful modernizing our fleet. We've spent about $9 billion across all our territories modernizing our generation fleet, and we're sitting here today still with rates 20% below the national average. So if we're given the latitude to do it thoughtfully, we think we can do it and continue to keep customer rates low. Nuclear, though, becomes sort of a diversification to that gas, because if we've learned anything in the energy industry over its lifetime, you do not want to be dependent on a single fuel source on behalf of customers.
Well, just as kind of a follow-up, I know that one of the things that Duke has talked about extensively is gas, and looking at power plants with gas and new pipeline coming into this area. Do we see more plants? It seems like the most inexpensive way to generate the most megawatts when you start talking about power generation. So how does that fit into what Duke's doing?
Right. We have built 5 new combined cycle plants in North Carolina since 2011. We have in our integrated resource planning process another 3 to 5 into the future. So having a gas pipeline providing diversity of resource in natural gas to the state of North Carolina, particularly to eastern North Carolina, could not only serve to fuel additional combined cycle gas plants, but we think it's an economic development lever for eastern North Carolina and presents a great opportunity for eastern North Carolina.
Wow. Do you think that regulations coming out of the EPA may be forcing this evolution away from coal too quickly, or is this in the sense that you talked about diversification? It sounds like you're already doing some changes, but is this pushing it too fast, or is there a level of uncertainty as to where you're going to end up?
Well, and where you stand on that issue depends on where you sit. Right? If you're part of the community that says coal shouldn't exist tomorrow, it's not fast enough. If you're having a hard time making ends meet, hard time paying your bill, if you're a manufacturer and you need every penny you can get off the rate of electricity to manufacture successfully, you're moving too fast. So what we're trying to do, with the lack and the absence of an energy policy in the country, we're trying to anticipate those regulations, get ahead of those regulations, and as a result, be thoughtful enough to keep our energy prices, electricity prices low, in spite of the fact that we are turning over, we are changing our portfolio, we have fewer coal plants, we have more natural gas. We see renewables being an important part in the future of our portfolio, and the price continues to come down on those renewables. So we look forward to a new portfolio in the decades ahead. It'll look different than it does today, but what's a non-negotiable is it's got to be reliable. We're 99.97% reliable today. We've got to keep that reliability up. We've got to keep the cost down.
Can you, Paul, you talking about the lack of real energy policy federally and nationally. Can you make that up by pushing state legislators in South Carolina and North Carolina to make up what's not happening federally? Is there a way to do that?
If I understand your question, I think that states are handcuffed by the federal regulations.
Okay.
The carbon emissions rules that were just promulgated in draft form is a great example. We've got coal combustion residuals rule that's coming out mid-December, and essentially states are going to have to comply with those federal rules, and they're no more prescient than we are in terms of what will those rules require.
And let me follow up quickly. Talk about natural gas. It's been announced that Piedmont Natural Gas and Duke Energy are looking at building a joint, or forming a joint venture around a pipeline, natural gas pipeline. And all of a sudden that's become the popular thing. Spectra Energy, former connection to Duke, as well as now Dominion Resources, says they want to build a natural gas pipeline. Does that say more about that the market is there for it, or is it a first mover advantage about yet one other pipeline coming into North Carolina?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. It's forward-looking in that we clearly see more baseload generation demand being in gas, and the need to keep a reliable supply of that gas, and hopefully a constant price. Gas has been at about a $4.50 per MMBTU for 18 months or so, but during the coldest days of the winter, gas was being delivered at delivery points on the East Coast at $120 per MMBTU. $4.50 yesterday, $120 today. We want to take that volatility out of the market if we can, again, on behalf of customers. In addition, though, Piedmont has a growing customer base that needs a good supply of natural gas, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, I see the potential for laterals on this gas pipeline that would be extraordinarily beneficial for North Carolina.
About 2 minutes.
We passed the solar bill, Paul, in South Carolina this year. What do you think the appetite is in North Carolina to address third-party metering for residential and small businesses that are creating solar gardens or whatever you want to call them on top of their building? What do you think happens in North Carolina from a solar standpoint?
So North Carolina back in 2007 passed Senate Bill 3 that was a broad coalition of stakeholders coming together to determine what the policy for North Carolina ought to be around renewable generation, specifically solar. And that has worked well. It has been the policy for North Carolina and then manifest in additional solar. North Carolina was fourth in the nation in installed solar last year. South Carolina doesn't have a Senate Bill 3, so this was their first sort of foray into balancing stakeholder interests around solar. As I sit here today, despite the subsidies that exist and the opportunities for solar, it's still the most expensive generation on our system. So I think as prices continue to drop, we're excited about solar. We think it'll be a great addition to our portfolio. And utility scale solar, which is where South Carolina essentially went primarily, is about 5 times less expensive than rooftop solar. So it's an emotional plus to have that on your rooftop, but it's a lot more expensive than having a utility scale solar system, which is where I think South Carolina is primarily going.
We have about a minute left, Rob, so I'm going to, if you can do it very quickly.
I wanted to ask you, are you optimistic that we will be able to get through the next 10, 15 years with all these evolutions in the power industry without major hiccups in the form of capacity or reliability of our system?
Speaking for our territories, the answer is yes. We are committed to reliability, to avoiding those hiccups. I'm less sanguine about some of the organized markets where nuclear is being driven out of the capacity mix because of sort of temporal energy prices. Those markets really aren't valuing the capacity nuclear offers to customers the way it should. So less optimistic about those. I think they'll find a way through. I'm very confident about our ability to serve customers over the next 10 to 15 years and beyond, reliably and cost effectively.
Paul, thank you for being on the program.
You're
and thanks
welcome.
for all the work you do in Raleigh as well as in D.C. around energy policy.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Good to hear you. Yeah. Rob, welcome back. Good to see you. Otis, always nice to see you.
Always glad to be here.
Thank
you for allowing us to participate.
Absolutely. See you next time. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a nice weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.